Welcome, everyone, to this roundup of International Leadership Week 2021. I'm John Williams, Chief Executive at the Institute of Leadership and Management. ILW21 has been more than 20 events over 5 days this week with expert speakers from all around the globe addressing this year's theme of Leadership Reinvented. We saw discussion on all manner of leadership issues, including, but not limited to, the universal nature of leadership, or at least the fact that leadership should be recognized as universal in organizations and in communities. We heard about the very evident need for emergent strategy to meet the challenges of the future, and for that emergent strategy to be founded on the agility of organizations, itself founded on the agility of us as individuals. And then putting the human back into leadership, seeing people as creative and ingenious, and capitalizing on our drive for vision and purpose. To chat through some of the highlights of this week, I'm joined by Tim Munden, Chief Learning Officer since May 2016 of global giant Unilever, responsible for learning and development for Unilever globally, and also responsible for well-being. In his role, Tim's focus is on building the leaders and teams needed for a purpose-driven business, developing the skills and capabilities for a digital and disrupted world, and enabling people in Unilever to have the well-being, there's that important word again, needed for happiness and high performance. Who better to share the highlights of the last week? Tim, welcome. Tim, one of the big themes that came out of this week, International Leadership Week, was this idea of the leader, not so much the leader as individual, but more about leadership. And in fact, Henry Mintzberg, one of our guests, used the term community ship to describe a broader basis for leadership. Tell us what you think about that, please.
I think it's a really relevant theme for 21st century leadership. I think what we see in organizations is the need to focus not just on a few individuals in old-fashioned terms at the top of a structure, but to think about leadership as something that everybody needs to participate in. Why? Because that idea of a structure with a top and a bottom is very 20th century. And it's passing fast, because what organizations find is that structure, if you use structure as an organizing principle, it slows you down. And in this modern age, in the current time where there's a need for rapid innovation, you need to actually move your organization to being much more of a network. And in a network, behavior becomes the key, not structure. And so everybody's behavior matters. Everybody becomes a leader. So I think that's a really relevant thought. And I think, outside of organizations, if we think of what's happening in society, and you think about the ground roots movement wanting to see purposeful activity about climate change, about social justice, I think we're also seeing there a growth of leadership in communities. So I think that idea of everyone as a leader is really relevant, really powerful.
It's interesting, yeah, because of course one of our mottos as an institute is that leadership is everywhere, and I like this idea of leadership as behavior rather than structure, because it also in a way gives everybody responsibility for leadership.
Yes.
And if they're going to get the authority, they need to accept the responsibility with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think so. It becomes, I think leadership is about behavior. I think it always has been. I think we've focused a lot on leadership skill, and that has its place, of course. But if the skill is like holding a pen or holding a hammer, you've got to have the enabling muscle and coordination in the arm to wield it. So I think we've got to think about what we call in Unilever the inner game and the outer game, who we are and what we do. And I think when we think about leadership in this broad way, everybody's a leader, thinking about how we help everybody to have that inner game that enables them to take responsibility, to carry the authority. I think that becomes critical. So I think we have to shift how we develop leaders, what we focus on, in order to enable that to happen.
That's really interesting, because it indicates a couple of things, really. One is that the need, I guess, to to inculcate the behaviors of leadership at an early stage if we possibly can, and certainly before people acquire the responsibility for leadership, because it's a bit late to acquire it once you've already got the responsibility for it. Do you think that organizations are inculcating leadership early enough?
Well, I can't talk about many of them. I can talk about the one I'm privileged to work in Unilever. So we have a thing in Unilever called the standards of leadership. That's how we describe leadership and the behaviors we expect. And they're for everybody. They're for everyone in the organization. They're not just for a kind of a few. That's the starting point. Then once you've got that leadership behavior, the language everywhere, everyone can start to think about it. We can offer training and support to everybody. For us, the foundation of leadership, we call purpose and service. Now, we're encouraging everyone in Unilever to discover their purpose. 55,000 people have been through that workshop. That, I think, is, to answer your question, is developing the foundations of leadership in as many people as possible, because that's at the heart of your leadership journey. Now, as your leadership journey develops, as you take on different, maybe broader responsibilities, so you need to acquire deeper inner game capabilities and new and different skills in the outer game. And I think it's a matter of trying to get everyone learning those all of the time, also supporting people as they need those skills in transition. I'm a big fan of supporting people through transitions. As their leadership responsibilities grow, giving them the space and the support and the stimulus that allows them to meet those broader responsibilities.
Interesting, because you mentioned there the idea of supporting people through transitions, and one of the themes that came up was this idea of transformational leadership. And almost by definition, I guess, transformational leadership is a process of transition. And a core element in that is the leaders, and that I guess means everybody, being able to envision the end game. Where is it that we want to try and go? And then believing in themselves and the organization enough to take it in the right direction. Do you think that we demand too much of people, perhaps, when we expect everybody to be able to grasp a vision or to be visionaries themselves?
No, I really don't. For vision, I would talk about purpose. And purposefulness is at the heart of what it is to be human. We all have purpose. You know, human beings need purposeful activity because it's hardwired into us. We're meaning seeking, meaning making creatures. And so I think to have purpose and to understand purpose, to respond to purpose is native to us all. And I think from purpose comes powerful vision. And so I don't think it's too much to expect. I think the thing that we've got to do is to create organizations that are purposeful, that encourage people to bring their purpose to the workplace, that encourage people to come to work in a place because of the purpose of the organization. When that happens, when an organization sets a really clear and an inspirational purpose, it gives everyone permission in the organization to vision in support of that. It's the ultimate of empowerment. It's the ultimate of inclusion. I think it's a massively important idea. Everyone has purpose and everyone wants to express it.
That's excellent. Very powerful concepts, really powerful concepts. Interestingly, one of the other quite strong issues that came up, it was around agility in organizations. Of course, we've seen over the last couple of years, it has been brought home to everybody, the requirement for agility. And I think what you've just described as having a basis of purpose, which is inherent in everybody in the organization. Do you think that lends itself to the ability of an organization to be agile in response to what happens in its marketplace?
Yeah, it's one of the key components. So what a purpose, an organizational purpose allows you to do is to navigate in disrupted times. We know how to make decisions. We know the foundation of our strategy because we have this kind of compass to navigate by. In Unilever, we call the purpose-driven strategy our compass, and for exactly that reason. So I think purpose is a great enabler of organizational agility, but you need some other things as well. Fundamentally, you need to encourage people to be personally agile. We talk about that as being constantly curious and courageous. So why constantly curious and courageous? Curious because we have to learn the entire time. To be agile, We have to be constantly scanning the environment for new insight. We have to have the courage to give up old truths about which we were certain, because they may no longer be true or relevant. We have to be willing to reinvent ourselves, our skill set, our identity, in order to meet the needs of what's happening around us. We need to be willing to mine our own insights, our own experience for what it can tell us. So I think that bedrock of personal agility is really important. And that spans into leadership agility. Sometimes what can stick us is a plan that we make at the beginning of the year. We think, here's what we're going to achieve. The reality changes and we fail to change the plan. You have to hold your plans lightly. So there's a kind of agility, which is the self-confidence that allows us to shift our plans and not feel threatened, to shift our skills and not feel threatened. I think organizations have got to help people to have that. Key part of that, of course, is our old friend psychological safety. In order to help people have that ability to constantly reshape, relearn themselves, and to generate new, fresh thinking as a result of it, you've got to have a psychologically safe environment in which people can bring those suggestions, can make the personal experiments in change that we really need.
Really interesting, because you managed to pick up there about 7 or 8 of the themes that came out of the course of this week, which is absolutely great. Things like clearly curiosity and courage, self-confidence, psychological safety. Obviously, one of the things that comes out of that for me is another theme that emerged was emergent strategy, and I think I would almost translate that into the ability of an organization to behave the way you just described individuals being able to behave: curious, courageous, allowing the strategy to shift with context. How easy is it, do you think, for a group of individuals to translate all of that personal agility into an organizational agility?
Well, I think you have to reshape what the organization looks like to a degree. So we talked earlier about structure.
Yep.
As an organizing principle, much less helpful than it was in the 20th century. But there are some other things we have to shift. I think we have to shift to some radical empowerment of teams, the teams at the front line who are supporting clients, customers, and users of products and services. We have to really empower them to have the space to innovate and respond to what is coming from those clients and customers. To do that, I think we have to bin an awful feudal concept of delegation. So if you think about delegation, and we used to talk about this all the time, didn't we? You must learn to delegate. Delegation is a great thing. Actually, when you look at delegation as an idea from the 21st century, it's rather awful. It's that I am the leader, I have all the power, and I lend bits of power out to people to get things done, and I'm going to have it back afterwards, and I can have it back at any time. It's awful. It really is feudal. It's like the old-fashioned monarch used to own all the land and lend bits of it out in return for services. Terrible. We have to think about empowerment by design, empowerment by existence. If you're there as a team to serve a customer, you're empowered to serve the customer. And I think that's a critical shift. That kind of shift, I think, enables organizational agility. So what those teams have, and this is another key concept of strategy, this is by no means new. It's come out of military strategy kind of 100 years ago. But we've got to step away from thinking that we can run organizations with detailed programs and plans that set out what we're going to do to the kind of nth degree. It just doesn't work. As soon as it hits reality, it's disruptive. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. Military principle. We've got to get that thinking deeper into organizations now. So you set strategic direction. In Agile, people talk about the chain of why. It's a beautiful idea, the chain of why that runs through the organization. That's why everybody's a leader. Everyone's supporting that chain of why. And so you go back to the kind of overarching purpose and you derive the critical activities. Those then become an outcome and parameters for the teams to follow. You set an outcome, you set parameters, and then you let people go in the space that creates. So rather than getting into detailed planning, we have to get into much more fluid navigation by the simple practice of define the outcome, define the parameters, let people go.
That's the perfect principle, rigid on the or focused on the vision, but flexible on the details, I guess. That is requires an awful lot of courage. Come back to that word courage from those people who still live in the 20th century structured world of leadership. And we do need, I guess, to help those leaders who see themselves at the top. How do organizations do that when it's the people at the top, in inverted commas, that we're talking about?
So I think we have to help leaders to develop the inner game capabilities of self-reflection, self-awareness. So you start to understand what's happening within yourself. We call it personal mastery, always bringing your best self, learning to really see what emotions are running in me. So let's take a concrete example. What happens to leaders when they become fearful of failure? Well, we become generally more controlling, don't we? We get on top of the situation. We don't want to fail. We're frightened of it. It's going to hurt us. So we get all over the situation to try and make sure there's not a failure. So fear leads to control. In order to undo that, yes, you can talk about control and the impact of it, but actually we have to help leaders address what's happening inside themselves. Why fear? How do you manage those emotions? We're spending a lot of time with leaders helping them think through how do you create inner space for yourself so that you can respond to what's happening, not react, not be triggered by what's happening. That's about developing it's basically good old emotional intelligence, awareness of what's happening within us, and then the ability to choose our response. What practices help? Breathing. We do a lot of box breathing as a technique, a 4-step breathing model. You breathe in, you hold the breath in, you breathe out, you hold the breath out. Technique used by special forces soldiers to help them to be really present and calm in the situation. Those kinds of techniques are really important in leadership. We spend a lot of time thinking about and training mindfulness. We have mindfulness champions within our business to help both with well-being and with kind of team development, leadership development. So I think some of those reflective practices, some of those inner game management practices become super important in helping leaders understand what's happening within them, and then being able to manage that so they can help the teams and the organization shift to this 21st century reality.
That's a fabulous concept. And if we extend that to all of the leaders, which essentially is everybody in the organization, that's quite a responsibility on the part of the organization to allow part of its efforts really to be devoted to what is essentially well-being as an investment in the future competencies of the organization. Do you think that organizations that can do that and publicly or visibly do that might well be perceived to have a competitive advantage as we see people, as you said yourself, are more and more interested in the nature of work and the nature of organization they work with? Is it likely to be a competitive advantage to be that kind of organization?
Without doubt, in every way. So I think we're in the age of the human organization. We're in a deeply human age of work, of organizations, of leadership. Why do I say that? All kinds of reasons. People want to work in organizations that are human, that take care of them, encourage them to be their best, that allow them to bring their whole self to work. So from the point of view of attracting and keeping the very best people, you want to be a human organization. You want that humanity, not the structure, to really dominate. From the point of view of society wants organizations to create outcomes that are positive for everyone. If you think about the future of work that can be made routine will be automated. What will be left? Work that can only be done by human beings, not by machines. Work that is creative, that is collaborative. That's what we will be doing. So I think we're moving into an age in which, so long as we can manage these transitions well and manage the transitions with humanity, then I think we're entering, and by that I mean we must re-skill people for work that will exist in the future, train people for this future. But if we can really do that well, I think we have a future coming in which the human becomes center stage again. We move away at last from this kind of Taylorist kind of the human being as part a cog in a machine, and we move back to the human being being the initiator of work as consumers, as customers, the human being at the heart of the creation of that work, and the society being the place where those things happen to the benefit of humanity. It's really exciting. But it is going to be a mindset shift, and we do have to start to really nurture it. So well-being and leadership, all of this is part of this nurturing of human energy and human capability, which is, in the end, the only thing that makes anything happen.
Tim, that's marvelous. And one last point, which sounds like almost a throwaway line. You mentioned there in a sense, the influence of organizations and people on each other. And therefore, I guess, the influence of organizations on society, where, in a sense, almost up to now, society has instructed organizations how they should operate in order to be efficient and effective. Now, if we see that transition to humanist organizations, maybe some of that will feed back into a society that has itself become a bit structural and dysfunctional. Do you think we're going to see that kind of influence, certainly from organizations like your own, which are very large and therefore very influential?
I think so. I think what we're seeing is organizations, like Unilever, setting out a purpose that is greater than itself, that also deeply informs our strategy and our role. I think you'll see companies making commitments, like publishing climate transition plans, like making commitments on, as we have, that all of our people will have a future fit skill set. I think you'll see organizations increasingly recognizing their interdependence with the societies they're in, and I think it's up to companies such as ours to set an example. But in the end, it's going to take everyone to fulfill that vision of purposeful organizations in healthy societies.
Fabulous. And Tim, I can't think of a better way to describe leadership reinvented than what you've just described. Thank you very, very much indeed, Tim Munden. It's been a really, really valuable conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for having me, John.
Tim, thank you very much for a great discussion. Well, there you have it. International Leadership Week 2021. If you missed any of the sessions, you can catch up with the recordings of them all next week on our website, www.institutelm.com. And you can continue the conversations on the Hub, our community forum for leaders and managers at all levels. Joining the Hub is free, and you don't have to be a member of the Institute. We hope you've all really enjoyed this last week and found insights, advice, ideas for your organization and for you personally. With that, I would like to thank again our latest guest, Tim Munden, and our sponsors, Belbin and Heriot-Watt University's Edinburgh Business School, for what has been a tremendous week. And thank you, especially, for joining us at International Leadership Week 2021. Stay safe and stay inspired.
We've had a shared unique moment. Everybody in the world needed to figure out what this coronavirus is and what do we do, and do we wear a mask, and am I vulnerable? And literally, it's been, to me, it's not a wonderful experience, but from a learning point of view, it's a wonderful example of the fact that we often are learning without clarity, without expertise, maybe without science or evidence at first. And it's in that world that we realize that learning is, to me, it's organic, it's dynamic, and this is a big one. It actually is dependent on failure. I did not learn how to ride my bicycle without falling off a few times.
If I were to point out 2 or 3 major aspects about transformational leadership, number one, it's about having people in the system who dare to challenge the status quo, who dare to question. And number 2, it's about the belief. It's about leaders who first, believe themselves that a better future is possible, that a better world can be created, who are optimistic about what lies ahead. And then they can inspire the same belief in others and those that they lead. That's the second aspect. And the third is about leaders who are not afraid of the 3 C's, the change, the challenges, and the competition, but who welcome these 3 C's, who use these 3 C's as catalysts for growth.
The word I like is communityship. I think leadership and communityship have to go together. I think good leadership encourages communityship, and communityship requires leadership to enhance it, to support it, to maintain it.